Have you ever been thrown under the bus by the exact person who caused the problem? I used to teach second grade, and there was this one girl in my class, Cadence, who loved to draw. She'd sketch everything from eyeballs to cathedrals, but there was one thing she loved drawing more than anything else. Her imaginary friend Bob. He had spiky hair, a weird mustache, and was always with her at parks or eating ice cream. She didn't have friends, so I figured this was her way of coping. But then she drew Bob's hand reaching toward her butt. When I asked her what this drawing meant, Cadence went white as paper. "Cadence, honey, is Bob real?" I tried again. She wouldn't answer, just slowly nodded. "Does your mom know about Bob?" She whispered back to me. "I don't know. He says it's our secret." My eyes popped open. 20 minutes later, I was trying to reach Cadence's mother when my classroom phone rang. Our secretary, Johanna. "There's family here to pick up Cadence early. Can you send her down?" I looked up at Cadence, coloring, and an awful feeling washed over me. "I'll walk her down myself." I took Cadence's hand, and we walked to the front office together. When we rounded the corner into the lobby, I saw a man standing by the counter. Spiky hair, mustache, cheekbones exactly like in the drawings. He turned and smiled at us. "There's my girl." I felt her hand go limp in mine. I stepped in front of Cadence and kept my voice steady. "What's the emergency?" He kept smiling, friendly and patient. "Just need to grab Cadence. Her mom asked me to pick her up." Something in my gut twisted. "Her mom didn't call the school." He laughed. "Yeah, she slammed at work. You know how it is." Johanna nodded along like this made perfect sense. "I need to verify with her mom first. She's the emergency contact." His smile flickered for just a second. "That's fine. Go right ahead." I pulled out my phone and dialed Cadence's mom. It went to voicemail. He spread his hands in this helpless gesture. "See? She's busy. That's why she sent me." His voice was reasonable. Johanna looked at me like I was being difficult over nothing. I felt Cadence trembling behind me. "Cadence, do you know this man?" I asked her directly. She looked up at him with terror, but she nodded. "There you go," he said. "Come on, sweetheart." He held out his hand. Cadence took a tiny step toward him, even though she was shaking. I pulled her back gently. "Cadence, do you want to go with him?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "She's shy," he explained, crouching down with a patient expression. "Aren't you, baby?" Cadence nodded quickly, trying to please him. He stood and reached for her again. "Let's go. We're already late." I didn't move. "Late for what?" His patience cracked just slightly. "Doctor's appointment. Not that it's your business." Johanna touched my arm. "I think you're overreacting. He clearly knows her. Then he can wait for Mom to call back." His jaw clenched and he looked down at Cadence. "Tell your teacher you want to come with me." Cadence started crying, silent tears trickling down her face. "Tell her," he said again, his voice harder now. "I want to go," she said, but her whole body was shaking. "She's terrified," I said. "She's upset because you're scaring her," he snapped, all his patience evaporating. I moved Cadence fully behind me. "Johanna, call the principal." "Don't," he said sharply, his eyes cutting to her. She froze with her hand halfway to the phone. "He knows Cadence," Johanna said weakly. "If he's family, call the principal. Now." Johanna finally reached for the phone. He grabbed Cadence's arm and yanked her toward him. She cried out and I shoved his hand away. "Don't touch her. She's my daughter," he snarled. All the warmth was gone. The principal came out of her office. "What's going on here?" He smoothed his expression immediately, trying to put the mask back on. "This teacher won't let me take my daughter." The principal looked at me for an explanation. "Her mom is the only permitted contact. She's not answering her phone. Cadence is terrified." Cadence was clutching my shirt with both hands. The principal looked at all of us. "I think you need to let her go with him." My blood ran cold. "What?" "He's her father. He has rights." "He's not on the authorized list," I said desperately. "This is his child," the principal said firmly. He smiled. "Thank you." He reached for Cadence, but I held her tighter. "I'm not letting her go." The principal's voice went hard. "Release her." "Look at her," I begged. "She's terrified. She's upset because of the scene you're making." The principal pried my hands away from Cadence. "Go with your father." Cadence took a trembling step toward him. He took her hand and started walking toward the door fast. He was at the exit. That's when the main doors burst open. Cadence's mom was sprinting in. "Joe!" she screamed. The man froze. "What are you doing with our daughter?" She ran at him and ripped Cadence away. "He's not allowed near her," she screamed at everyone. "He molested a child." Everyone's faces dropped. All of a sudden, the principal turned to me. "Why would you let Cadence go with this man knowing who he was?" She turned to the mother. "Ma'am, this is the teacher responsible." My jaw hung open. Joe backed toward the exit with his hands up like he was the one being attacked. Security finally showed up. 2 guys in blue uniforms who looked confused about what they'd walked into. Joe slipped past them before anyone could tell them to stop him, and the glass doors swung shut behind him. I just stood there watching him leave while the principal's words kept playing in my head. She'd blamed me. After everything I'd done to protect Cadence, she'd turned to the mother and called me responsible. Cadence's mother spun away from me and marched straight up to the principal, still holding Cadence tight against her side. Her voice came out low and shaking. "How did he get past your front desk when there's a restraining order on file?" The principal opened her mouth, but Cadence's mother cut her off, her voice getting louder with each word. "There is a court order that says he cannot come within 500 feet of my daughter, and your school let him walk right in here and try to take her." Johanna stepped forward, wringing her hands. "He seemed legitimate. He knew Cadence's name and said you'd sent him." Cadence's mother whirled on her. "Did you check his ID? Did you look at the authorized pickup list? Did you do anything except take a predator at his word?" Johanna's face went white and she looked down at her desk. The principal straightened her shoulders and her voice went cold and professional. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but this teacher created a scene that traumatized your daughter instead of handling this quietly through proper channels." I felt something hot flash through my chest. The mother's head snapped toward the principal and she actually laughed, this harsh sound with no humor in it. "She protected my child. She is the only person in this building who did what they were supposed to do." The principal tried to speak, but the mother talked right over her. "I'm calling the police right now to report your negligence, and then I'm calling my lawyer, and then I'm calling the superintendent." She pulled out her phone with her free hand, the other one still holding Cadence close. The principal's professional mask cracked for just a second, and I saw panic flash across her face. "I don't think that's necessary. We can discuss this calmly." "No," Cadence's mother said. "Already dialing. We're way past that." I stepped forward and touched her arm gently. "Can I take Cadence back to my classroom while you make your calls?" She looked at me and her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set hard. "Yes, thank you." I held out my hand, and Cadence grabbed it with both of hers, her little fingers digging into my palm. We walked down the hallway away from the shouting that was starting up again behind us. My classroom was at the end of the hall, and when I opened the door, the afternoon sun was coming through the windows, making everything look normal and safe. Cadence wouldn't let go of my hand even when I tried to sit her down at her desk. She pressed herself against my side, and I felt her whole body trembling. I knelt down next to her chair so we were at the same height. "You're safe now," I told her. "Your mom is here, and she's not going to let anyone take you." Cadence's voice came out so quiet I almost couldn't hear it. "I was so scared he would take me." "I know, honey. But I didn't let him, did I?" She shook her head and a tear rolled down her cheek. "I promise you," I said, looking right into her eyes, "I will never let anyone take you anywhere you don't want to go." She threw her arms around my neck and held on tight, and I hugged her back while she cried into my shoulder. We stayed like that until she stopped shaking. The police showed up 20 minutes later. I heard their radios crackling in the hallway before I saw them. 2 officers in dark uniforms with serious faces. They asked me to come to the office, and I brought Cadence with me because she still wouldn't let go of my hand. Everyone was in the lobby again, the same place where it had all happened. The officers took out notebooks and started asking questions. I explained everything from the beginning, from Cadence's drawings of Bob, to her telling me it was a secret to the phone call from Johanna, to the man in the lobby who looked exactly like the drawings. One of the officers wrote down every word while the other one watched my face. I told them about Cadence's disclosure that morning, how she'd told me Bob touched her and it was their secret, and how I'd reported it to the counselor right away. The officer's pen stopped moving and he looked up at me. "You reported suspected abuse this morning?" "Yes," I said. "To the school counselor, like we're supposed to." He wrote something down and underlined it twice. Cadence's mother had a folder of papers that she handed to the officers. "Court documents," she said. "Restraining order, terminated parental rights, everything." The officers looked through the papers and I watched their faces get harder. One of them looked at the principal. "You had all this information on file?" The principal shifted her weight. "We have emergency contact forms, but we don't always have access to court orders." The officer's voice went flat. "There's a note right here on the custody paperwork that says no contact allowed with biological father Joe Brennan." The principal didn't say anything. The officer closed his notebook. "Joe Brennan violated his restraining order by coming here today. There's an active warrant out for his arrest now." He looked at Cadence's mother. "He has no legal right to see or contact your daughter. We'll be following up with the school about how he gained access to the building." The principal's face went pale and she excused herself, walking fast toward her office. The other officer asked if I wanted to press charges for the physical contact when Joe grabbed Cadence's arm. I said yes. After the police left, the principal called me into her office. Her door clicked shut behind me and she didn't ask me to sit down. "I'm placing you on administrative leave pending an investigation." The words hit me like cold water. An investigation into what? "Your unauthorized interference with a parent's rights created liability for the district." I stared at her. "He's not a parent. He has no rights." She pulled out a form and started filling it in. "That's not your determination to make. You should have called administration and let us handle it." "I did call administration. I called you. And you told me to let him take her." She kept writing, not looking at me. "You'll be notified when the investigation is complete." I walked out of her office and straight to my classroom where I'd left my phone. My hands were shaking, so hard I could barely dial. The union picked up on the second ring and I explained everything in one long rush of words. The representative said she'd be there within the hour and to not sign anything or agree to anything until she arrived. She showed up 50 minutes later looking like she was ready for a fight. I met her in the lobby and we went straight to the principal's office. The union rep didn't knock, just opened the door and walked in with me behind her. She dropped her briefcase on the principal's desk with a thud. I've reviewed the situation with my member. Mandatory reporting laws protect teachers who act to prevent child abuse, and this administrative leave is retaliatory. The principal leaned back in her chair. The teacher interfered with a parent's rights. The union rep pulled out papers from her briefcase. The biological father has no parental rights. The court terminated them. There's a restraining order. My member followed mandatory reporting protocols and protected a child from a registered predator who violated a court order. If you proceed with this leave, we'll file a complaint with the State Labor Board. The principal's jaw tightened, but she picked up the phone and made a call. After a quiet conversation, she hung up and looked at me. The leave is rescinded. You can return to your classroom. The union rep smiled, not friendly. Good decision. We gathered my things and walked out together. The union rep told me to document everything and call her immediately if there was any more retaliation. When I got back to my classroom, there was a substitute teacher with my students. I thanked her and she left, and my kids all looked at me with big, worried eyes. I tried to act normal, going through our afternoon routine like nothing had happened, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The next day, Cadence's mother came to see me before school started. She knocked on my classroom door and I let her in. She looked tired but determined. I wanted to thank you personally. If you hadn't stopped Joe yesterday, he would have taken Cadence and I might never have seen her again. I felt my throat get tight. I just did what any teacher would do. No, she said firmly. You did what you were supposed to do, and apparently that's not what everyone does in this building. She told me she was filing a formal complaint against the school with the district. She had meetings scheduled with the superintendent and the school board. I'm going to make sure this never happens to another child. The rest of the day passed in a blur of concerned looks from other teachers and my students asking why Cadence wasn't there. I kept teaching, kept moving through math problems and reading time, but my mind was spinning with everything that had happened. When lunch finally came, I grabbed my sandwich and headed to the teacher's lounge, hoping for a few minutes of quiet before the afternoon chaos started. The school counselor walked in right behind me and closed the door. She looked awful, like she hadn't slept and her hands were shaking when she poured her coffee. I watched her pace near the windows for a minute before she turned to face me. She told me she needed to confess something and my stomach dropped before she even said the words. That report I made about Cadence's drawings, the one where I documented the inappropriate touching and her disclosure about Bob being real, she never sent it to administration. She never called CPS either, even though that's the law. She kept saying she meant to, she was going to, but she got busy with other cases and it slipped through the cracks. Her voice cracked when she said she was terrified of losing her job, and I just stared at her because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The system had failed Cadence at every single level before Joe even walked through our front doors. I walked back to my classroom feeling sick, knowing that if the counselor had done her job, administration would have known about the abuse. They would have flagged Joe's name in the system. They would have stopped him at the door. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started typing everything I could remember. I documented the drawings Cadence made, writing descriptions of each one and the dates I saw them. I wrote down exactly what she said when I asked if Bob was real, her exact words about it being their secret. I included the time I reported it to the counselor and what I told her. Then I documented the entire lobby incident, every detail I could recall from the moment Johanna called my classroom to when Cadence's mother ripped her daughter away from Joe. I wrote about the principal's reaction, how she blamed me immediately, how she tried to put me on leave. My union rep had called me that evening and told me to create this timeline because she had a feeling this situation was going to get much bigger before it got resolved. She said documentation would be my protection when things escalated, and I needed to have everything in writing while the memories were still fresh. I saved the document and emailed it to myself and to her, making sure there were copies that couldn't disappear. 3 days later, my phone rang during my planning period. The district superintendent, Renata Colombo, wanted to meet with me that afternoon, and I should bring my union representative. My heart started racing because superintendents don't usually get involved unless something is seriously wrong. I called my union rep and she cleared her schedule immediately, telling me not to worry but also not to go into that meeting alone. We met in the parking lot of the district office and walked in together. Renata's office was on the 3rd floor, big windows looking out over the parking lot, and she stood up when we entered. She shook both our hands and gestured to the chairs across from her desk. She asked me to walk through everything that happened, starting from when I first noticed Cadence's drawings. I pulled out my typed timeline and walked her through it step by step. She took notes the entire time, her pen moving fast across her legal pad, and she didn't interrupt once. She didn't make excuses for the principal or try to defend the school's actions. She just listened and wrote and occasionally asked clarifying questions about specific details. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. She told me the district was conducting a full investigation into the school's procedures, and specifically into how the principal handled the situation. They were reviewing the counselor's failure to report, Johanna's failure to check the authorized pickup list, and the principal's decision to blame me instead of protecting Cadence. Then she asked if I felt safe returning to work under the principal's supervision. I appreciated that she asked because it meant she understood this wasn't just about policies and procedures. I told her honestly that the principal had been hostile toward me since the incident, that she'd tried to put me on administrative leave for protecting a child, and that I didn't trust her to support me if another situation came up. Renata wrote that down too and said she would take my concerns seriously. Later that week, my union rep called with more information. Cadence's mother had met separately with district officials and revealed the full truth about Joe. He wasn't just some estranged father with boundary issues. He was a registered sex offender who had molested his niece 5 years ago. The restraining order existed specifically because he'd shown predatory behavior toward Cadence during supervised visits before the court terminated his parental rights last year. He had no legal right to see Cadence at all, and the school had all of this information on file in her records. My union rep also told me that Johanna never checked Joe against the authorized pickup list before calling my classroom. She never asked for his ID. She just took him at his word that he was there to pick up his daughter, and called me to send Cadence down. The principal was now trying to blame Johanna entirely for the security failure, but Cadence's mother's complaint named both of them plus the counselor for failing to protect her daughter. The complaint also named the district for not having proper systems in place to prevent registered sex offenders from accessing schools. My union rep said this was turning into a much bigger issue than just one incident, and the district was scrambling to figure out how their safety protocols had failed so completely. The principal called a staff meeting the following Monday. Every teacher crammed into the library after school, and she stood at the front with a printed handout about new safety protocols. She announced that from now on, all teachers were required to send students to the office immediately when any family member arrived for pickup. We were not to question parents or ask for verification. We were to send the child down and let the office handle all interactions with families. I felt my jaw clench as she talked because this policy would have let Joe take Cadence before anyone could stop him. Several teachers started raising their hands, pointing out exactly that problem. One teacher asked what we were supposed to do if a student seemed afraid of the person picking them up. Another asked how this policy protected children from unauthorized adults. The principal kept insisting that the office staff were trained to handle these situations, and teachers needed to focus on teaching, not security. I could feel the frustration building in the room because we all knew this policy was designed to protect the principal from liability, not to protect kids. It was removing our ability to act as the first line of defense for our students. I raised my hand and waited for her to call on me. When she did, I stood up so everyone could hear me clearly. I said that mandatory reporters have a legal duty to protect children from suspected abuse, and this policy contradicts state law. If a teacher has reason to believe a child is in danger, we're required to act, not pass them off to someone else. The principal's face went bright red and she cut me off, saying the meeting was over and we all needed to review the new protocols before implementation next week. But as everyone filed out, I noticed several teachers nodding at me in agreement. A few stopped to whisper that they thought the policy was wrong too, and one teacher squeezed my arm and thanked me for speaking up. The next morning, I was setting up my classroom when I heard running footsteps in the hallway. Cadence came sprinting around the corner and threw herself at me, wrapping her arms around my waist so tight I could barely breathe. She'd been out of school for 3 days, and seeing her back made my throat tight. Her mother appeared in the doorway a moment later, and she told me they'd enrolled Cadence in trauma therapy. Cadence was having nightmares about Joe, waking up scared that he was in her room or that he'd come to take her away. But her mother said Cadence felt safe at the school because she knew I wouldn't let anyone hurt her. Cadence looked up at me with those big eyes and asked if I'd still be her teacher, and I promised her I wasn't going anywhere. Her mother thanked me again before taking Cadence to her new classroom, and I stood there fighting back tears because that little girl trusted me when every system around her had failed. The principal started documenting everything I did after that. She showed up at my classroom door to check my arrival time each morning. She requested copies of my lesson plans daily instead of weekly. She observed my interactions with students and took notes about how I managed my classroom. It was obvious she was building a case to fire me, collecting anything she could use against me in a disciplinary hearing. My union rep said this was classic retaliation, and we were documenting her behavior right back. Every time she showed up unannounced, I noted the date and time. Every unnecessary request for paperwork got logged. We were building our own case showing that she was harassing me for doing my job and protecting a child from a predator. That same week, a school board member named Graham Pittman called my cell phone. He introduced himself and said he'd heard about what happened with Cadence from her mother's complaint. He asked if I would be willing to speak at the next board meeting about the incident. I hesitated because I knew the principal would see this as me going around her, but Graham said the board needed to hear from the teacher who actually protected the child, not just the administration's version. I agreed to meet with him first before deciding. 2 days later, I sat across from Graham in a coffee shop near the district office. He had a folder thick with papers and he looked tired. He told me that Cadence's mother had filed complaints with the school board, the district office, and the state education department. Each complaint detailed how the school failed to protect her daughter, and how I was blamed for doing my job. Graham said there were bigger problems in how the district handled safety rules, and this incident was showing failures that had been there for years. He explained that other parents had raised concerns about visitor access and pickup procedures at different schools, but nothing ever changed. The administration always said they were working on it, but no real improvements happened. Now with Cadence's case getting attention, the board finally had leverage to demand actual changes. I asked Graham what speaking at the board meeting would accomplish. He said it would put a human face on the policy failures and show board members exactly what teachers deal with when administrators care more about avoiding problems than protecting kids. I told him I'd think about it and let him know. When I got back to the school the next morning, the principal called me into her office before first period. She closed the door and asked me directly if I'd been talking to Graham Pittman. I said yes, that he'd contacted me about the board meeting. Her face went red and she accused me of going over her head to hurt her reputation. I kept my voice calm and told her that a board member responding to a parent complaint had contacted me, and I had every right to speak truthfully about what I saw. She said I was making the school look bad, and if I testified at the board meeting, it would show I wasn't a team player. I reminded her that my job was protecting students, not protecting her image. She dismissed me with a warning that my actions would have consequences. 3 days later, a woman named Deb Yamaguchi from Child Protective Services came to interview me during my lunch break. She had kind eyes, but her questions were direct and detailed. She asked me to walk through everything from Cadence's drawings to the lobby confrontation. When I told her about reporting the drawings to the school counselor that same morning, her expression changed. She asked if I had proof of that report. I showed her the email I'd sent the counselor with photos of the drawings attached. Deb looked troubled and said the counselor never forwarded my report to CPS or administration like she was supposed to. She explained that the counselor could face serious professional problems for that failure because mandatory reporters have legal duties. Deb thanked me for keeping records and said my documentation would be important for their investigation. Before she left, Deb told me something that made my stomach flip. Joe had been arrested 2 days after the school incident when he violated the restraining order again by showing up at Cadence's home. The police were already looking for him because of what happened at the school, so they arrested him immediately. He was in jail now waiting for trial, and Cadence's mother had full custody with extra protective orders in place. Knowing Joe was locked up made me feel like I could finally breathe properly again. That afternoon, during my planning period, another second-grade teacher named Mrs. Westbrook knocked on my classroom door. She looked nervous and asked if she could talk to me privately. She closed the door and told me she was glad I stood up to the principal because the principal had been ignoring safety concerns for years. Mrs. Westbrook said that last year, an unauthorized person picked up a student from her class, and the office never verified who they were. The student was returned safely a few hours later, but it turned out to be a custody dispute situation. The principal told Mrs. Westbrook not to discuss it with anyone and said the situation was handled, but nothing changed about the sign-in procedures or verification process. Over the next week, 3 more teachers came to me with similar stories. One teacher said the principal refused to call police when a parent made threats during a conference. Another said background checks for classroom volunteers were 6 months overdue, but the principal let them keep working with kids anyway. A third teacher described reporting a concern about a student's bruises, but the principal told her to mind her own business instead of calling CPS. I realized this wasn't just about what happened with Cadence. The school had a pattern of putting convenience and avoiding conflict ahead of child safety. I met with my union rep again and told her about these other teachers' concerns. She suggested I share them with the district investigation because they showed a bigger problem than one incident. I asked the teachers if they would be willing to provide written statements and all of them agreed. They were scared of retaliation from the principal, but they were more scared of another child getting hurt. The district investigation team started digging deeper into the school's safety procedures. They found that the visitor sign-in system hadn't been updated or maintained properly in over 2 years. Background checks on volunteers were months overdue, like the teacher said. There was no clear rule for how to verify adults who came to pick up students. Different office staff used different methods, and sometimes they just trusted that people were who they said they were. The investigation report said the principal's poor management created weak spots that Joe used to get access to Cadence. A week after the investigation findings came out, Renata Colombo called me in for another meeting. She thanked me for bringing forward the other teachers' safety concerns. She said the investigation had grown beyond just the single incident with Cadence to look at the whole safety situation under the principal's leadership. Renata told me the board was taking this seriously and changes were coming. She asked if I felt comfortable continuing to work at the school, and I said yes as long as the principal wasn't there anymore. The next day, the district announced that the principal was placed on leave while the investigation continued. An interim principal named Dr. Murray took over immediately. The change in the building was instant. Teachers started talking openly about concerns instead of whispering in hallways. Dr. Murray held a staff meeting her first day and said her door was always open for safety issues. She actually listened when we talked about student protection instead of making excuses or blaming us. For the first time in months, I felt like I worked in a place that cared about doing the right thing. Cadence's mother pulled me aside after school 2 days later and asked if I would write a letter for her complaint to the state education department. She had all the paperwork spread out on her kitchen table when I came over that evening, and she walked me through what she needed. I sat down with my laptop and started typing everything I could remember from the moment Cadence first drew Bob's hand reaching toward her. I described how she went pale when I asked about the drawing, how she nodded when I asked if Bob was real, how she whispered that it was their secret. I wrote about calling the counselor and making my report, about the phone call from Johanna saying family was there to pick Cadence up early. I detailed every second in that lobby, from seeing Joe's face match the drawings to watching him try to manipulate everyone into letting him take her. I wrote about the principal forcing me to release Cadence despite her terror, about how close Joe came to getting out that door with her. Then I wrote about the aftermath, about being blamed and put on leave, about the principal's retaliation and hostility. The letter ran 6 pages single-spaced by the time I finished. Cadence's mother read it with tears running down her face and told me this was exactly what the state needed to see. She submitted the complaint the next morning with my letter attached. 3 days after that, my phone rang during lunch duty. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice introduced herself as a reporter from the local newspaper, asking about rumors of a safety incident at the school involving a registered sex offender. My stomach dropped and I told her I couldn't talk right then. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. She asked if I could call her back and I said maybe, then hung up and immediately texted my union rep. She called me within 5 minutes and told me not to speak to any media yet. The district was trying to keep this quiet, and any public comments from me could complicate things. I understood, but I also knew the story was getting out whether the district liked it or not. The reporter called back twice more that day, and I didn't answer either time. The newspaper ran the story 4 days later. I bought a copy on my way to the school and read it in my car before first bell. The headline said, "Registered offender accessed elementary school. Attempted to remove child." The article didn't name me or Cadence, but it laid out the basic facts that Joe had a restraining order and no custody rights, that he walked into the school and tried to take his daughter, that he was arrested for violating the order. The story mentioned that school officials initially allowed the attempt to proceed despite the child's visible distress. It quoted the district spokesperson saying they were reviewing their procedures. I folded the paper and stuck it in my bag, knowing this was about to get much bigger. That afternoon, I got an email from someone named Alec Donaldson. He introduced himself as an attorney specializing in education law and said he'd been following the case in the news. He wrote that he believed I did everything right while the administration failed badly, and he wanted to offer his services pro bono if the district retaliated against me any further. I read the email 3 times. I'd never had a lawyer offer to help me for free before. I forwarded it to my union rep and she called me right away saying this was huge, that Alec was well known for taking on the school districts that punish teachers for protecting kids. She told me to accept his offer immediately. I emailed him back that evening and we set up a call for the next day. The school board announced a special meeting 2 weeks later to address parent concerns about school safety. Graham called me the day after the announcement and asked if I would be willing to testify about what happened. I felt my chest get tight. Speaking in front of the whole community about this was terrifying. But Graham explained that parents were demanding answers, and the board needed to hear from the teacher who actually protected Cadence, not just the administration's version. He said my testimony could prevent this from happening to other children. I told him I would do it. After I hung up, I sat on my couch for 20 minutes just staring at the wall, trying to process what I'd just agreed to. I met with Alec and my union rep at a coffee shop to prepare my testimony. Alec brought a legal pad covered in notes and walked me through exactly what the board needed to hear. He said we should focus on the specific system failures and what needed to change, not attack the principal personally, even though she deserved it. The goal was to show how weak protocols endangered a child, not to make this about one bad administrator. We went through the timeline together and Alec helped me organize it clearly. First the drawings and disclosure, then the report to the counselor that went nowhere, then Joe showing up in the lobby confrontation, then the principal's retaliation. We practiced my testimony 3 times until I could deliver it without my voice shaking. My union rep reminded me that I had done nothing wrong, and I needed to speak with confidence about protecting Cadence. The night of the school board meeting arrived, and I drove to the district office with my hands gripping the steering wheel too tight. The parking lot was packed, and I had to the park 2 blocks away. When I walked into the building, the meeting room was standing room only. Parents lined the walls, and teachers I recognized from other schools filled the back rows. News cameras set up in the corner. I found a seat near the front and tried to breathe normally. Cadence's mother was already there, and she reached over to squeeze my hand. The board called the meeting to order and opened public comment. Cadence's mother stood up first. She walked to the microphone and described getting the phone call at work that Joe was at the school. She talked about the terror of driving 90 miles an hour knowing her daughter was in danger. She explained about the restraining order in the court case and how Joe had already shown predatory behavior toward Cadence. Her voice broke when she described running into that lobby and seeing Joe holding Cadence's hand at the exit. She told the board that if I hadn't delayed him by refusing to let Cadence go, he would have been gone with her daughter before she arrived. I walked to the microphone next and my legs felt unsteady. I started with Cadence's drawings and how the images changed to show Bob touching her inappropriately. I explained her disclosure that Bob was real and it was their secret. I detailed my report to the counselor and how I was trying to reach Cadence's mother when Johanna called saying family was there for early pickup. I walked them through the lobby confrontation step by step, describing Joe's manipulation tactics and how he tried to use his patience and charm to make me seem unreasonable. I explained how the principal ordered me to release Cadence despite her obvious terror. I told them about being blamed immediately after Cadence's mother arrived, about being put on administrative leave, about the principal's ongoing retaliation. Then I looked directly at the board members and told them that mandatory reporters need support from administration when they act to protect children from abuse, not punishment for making administrators uncomfortable. After me, 4 other teachers stood up to testify. One talked about reporting a student's suspicious bruises and being told by the principal to mind her own business. Another described an unauthorized person picking up a child last year, and the incident being hushed up. A third mentioned that background checks for volunteers were 6 months overdue, but the principal let them keep working with kids anyway. The fourth teacher shared concerns about the visitor sign and system not being enforced. The pattern became obvious as each teacher spoke. The principal had prioritized avoiding problems over addressing them. She had shut down safety concerns instead of investigating them. She had created a culture where teachers were afraid to report issues because they knew they would be blamed. Children were put at risk over and over because fixing problems was harder than pretending they didn't exist. The board thanked everyone for their testimony and announced they were going into closed session to discuss personnel matters. We all filed out into the hallway and waited. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead and people talked in small groups, but I just sat on the floor against the wall. Cadence's mother sat down next to me and took my hand. She didn't say anything for a long time, and then she leaned over and whispered that whatever the board decided, I had saved her daughter, and she would never forget that. We sat there holding hands for over 2 hours while the board deliberated behind closed doors. The doors finally opened and the board members filed back into the meeting room. Everyone in the hallway stood up and followed them inside. Graham stepped up to the microphone first and his face looked serious. He announced that after reviewing all the testimony and evidence, the principal would not be returning to the school. The room stayed quiet, but I could feel the tension release from my shoulders. Graham continued talking about how the board was launching a complete review of safety rules across the whole district. He said multiple people failed to protect Cadence and those failures would be fixed. After the meeting ended, reporters crowded around Graham outside and he repeated that child safety was the board's top priority. He said the district would make sure this never happened again at any school. The next Monday, I walked back into my classroom feeling like I'd been through a war. My body was tired and my brain felt foggy from all the stress of the past month. But when I opened the door, my students rushed over and hugged my legs. They'd made welcome back drawings that covered my desk. Cadence came up last and handed me a picture she'd drawn of the two of us holding hands with a huge heart around us. I had to blink hard to keep from crying right there in front of everyone. She smiled at me and whispered that she was glad I was back. I hung her drawing right next to my desk where I could see it all day. That afternoon, the interim principal called an all-staff meeting in the library. She stood at the front with a thick folder of papers and explained the new safety rules we'd be following. Every single visitor had to show ID at the front desk and get checked against the pickup list. No exceptions. Any teacher who suspected abuse had to report it to CPS immediately, not just to the counselor or principal. And the district promised to protect teachers who raised safety concerns instead of punishing them. She looked directly at me when she said that last part. These were exactly the changes we needed from the start. If these rules had been in place before, Joe never would have made it past the front desk. 2 days later, I heard through the staff gossip that the counselor had resigned. Apparently, she quit before the district could fire her for not reporting my concerns about Cadence. The new counselor started the following week, and she had years of training in recognizing trauma and abuse in kids. She came to introduce herself and asked me to let her know if I ever had concerns about any student. She said she took mandatory reporting seriously and would never ignore a teacher's report. The school finally felt like a place that actually cared about protecting children instead of just avoiding problems. A reporter from a regional news station called me at home one evening. She said she'd heard about my case and wanted to interview me about being punished for protecting a student. I told her I needed to think about it and called Alec right away. He said doing the interview would put public pressure on the district to make changes at other schools, not just mine. He reminded me that my story could help other teachers who were scared to report abuse. I agreed to do it. The news crew came to my apartment the next Saturday. I sat on my couch with the camera pointed at me and told the whole story. I used my real name and let them show my face. I explained that teachers need to be able to protect kids without being afraid that principals will punish them for it. I said too many administrators care more about avoiding problems than fixing them, and children get hurt because of that. The interview aired during the evening news and my phone started blowing up with messages. Parents, teachers, even people I didn't know were reaching out to say they supported what I did. The state education department opened their own investigation into the district's safety rules a few days later. The news coverage and Cadence's mother's complaint had caught their attention. Renata called me privately and said she was grateful I'd spoken publicly. She told me she'd been trying to get these safety changes approved for years, but some principals kept blocking them. Now the state was forcing the changes to happen. She said my willingness to speak out had finally broken through the resistance. Other parents started coming forward with their own safety concerns about different schools in the district. One mom said her son's school let volunteers work with kids even though their background checks were 6 months expired. Another dad complained that his daughter's school didn't enforce the visitor sign and system. The state investigation grew bigger and started looking at safety problems across the whole district. My interview had opened the door for other people to share problems they'd been too scared to talk about before. 3 weeks after my interview aired, Cadence's mother called with news about Joe. He'd taken a plea deal and admitted to breaking the restraining order and trying to take Cadence from the school. The deal included prison time. She said knowing Joe would be locked up gave Cadence some peace. Her daughter could finally stop being afraid that he'd show up and try to grab her again. I felt relieved too, knowing he couldn't hurt Cadence or any other child for a while. The district's lawyer contacted Alec in early December with a formal apology letter for me. They also wanted to give me a commendation for protecting Cadence. The whole thing felt empty after everything they'd put me through. Alec negotiated a settlement that included paying me back for the days I was on administrative leave. The district also had to promise in writing that they wouldn't retaliate against me anymore. Alec got everything documented legally so they couldn't go back on their word. The money and the promises were nice, but what mattered most was that real changes were happening to keep kids safe. The school board scheduled a public hearing for January to present their investigation findings. Graham called me the week before and asked if I'd attend to answer questions if needed. I agreed, even though the thought of sitting in front of a room full of people made my stomach twist. The night of the hearing, the district office meeting room was packed with parents, teachers, and community members. I sat in the front row next to Cadence's mother, while Graham and 2 other board members took their seats at the long table up front. Graham started by thanking everyone for coming and explaining that the investigation had uncovered problems bigger than just one incident at one school. He pulled up a presentation showing that 5 other schools in the district had similar safety issues. Background checks weren't being done on time. Visitor sign-in systems weren't working right. Authorized pickup lists weren't being checked before releasing students. The room got really quiet as Graham went through each finding. He showed how these failures put hundreds of kids at risk every single day. Then he presented his recommendations for fixing everything. New visitor management systems for every school. Mandatory training twice a year for all staff. Clear procedures for checking IDS and authorized lists. Protection policies for teachers who report safety concerns. The board voted right there to approve all of Graham's recommendations and fund them starting next semester. 2 weeks after the hearing, I got a call from the state education department. They'd finished their review of the former principal's conduct during the Joe incident. The woman on the phone told me they weren't filing criminal charges, but they were suspending her teaching license for 1 year. She explained that the principal had failed to maintain proper safety protocols and then retaliated against me for being a mandatory reporter. The suspension meant she couldn't work in any school or educational setting for 12 months. I hung up feeling relieved that there were actual consequences for what she'd done. Renata called me that same afternoon and asked if I'd be willing to serve on a district committee. They were developing new training programs for administrators about supporting teachers who report abuse and responding correctly to child safety concerns. She said my experience would help them create training that actually prepared principals to handle these situations better. I said yes because turning what happened to me into something useful for other teachers felt good. Our committee met twice a month and I got to share my perspective on what administrators should and shouldn't do when a teacher raises concerns about a student's safety. Cadence's mother stopped by my classroom one afternoon in February to give me an update on how her daughter was doing. She said the therapy sessions were really helping, and Cadence was having fewer nightmares about Joe. The anxiety about him showing up had decreased a lot since he'd been sentenced. What made her mother happiest was that Cadence was still drawing all the time, but the pictures had changed completely. She pulled out her phone and showed me recent drawings. They showed Cadence playing with other kids at recess, Cadence with her mom baking cookies, Cadence at her grandmother's house with the family dog. Not a single picture had Bob lurking in the background anymore. Her mother's eyes got watery as she scrolled through the images. She told me that Cadence had made real friends this year and was smiling again. Seeing those drawings and knowing Cadence felt safe enough to stop putting her abuser in her art made everything I'd gone through feel worth it. The new safety protocols rolled out at the start of the spring semester in January. Every staff member had to complete 8 hours of training on recognizing signs of abuse, proper reporting procedures, and the legal protections we have as mandatory reporters. The training was actually good because it used real examples and taught us specific things to look for and document. Every school got new visitor management systems installed that required photo IDs to be scanned before anyone could get past the front desk. The system automatically checked names against court records and restraining orders. Authorized pickup lists got loaded into the computer system, so the front desk could verify in seconds whether someone was allowed to take a student. Clear procedures got posted in every office explaining exactly how to handle situations when something seemed wrong. Teachers could see that the district was finally taking student safety seriously, instead of just hoping nothing bad would happen. The State Teachers Association contacted me in March about giving me an award at their annual conference. They wanted to recognize my advocacy for student safety and protection of mandatory reporter rights. I almost said no because I didn't do what I did for recognition. But my union rep convinced me that accepting the award would send a message to other teachers that speaking up for kids is valued and supported. The ceremony was at a hotel conference center with about 300 teachers from across the state. When they called my name and I walked up to accept the plaque, the whole room stood up and clapped. What made it meaningful wasn't the award itself, but knowing that all these other teachers understood the difficult position I'd been in. Several of them came up to me afterward and shared their own stories of times they'd had to choose between following orders and protecting a student. The recognition felt good because it came from people who really got what it's like to be in the classroom making those impossible choices. After the news coverage and the award, my email inbox started filling up with messages from teachers at other schools and even other districts. They reached out asking for advice when they faced pushback or retaliation for reporting safety concerns about students. One teacher told me her principal had written her up for insubordination after she called CPS about a student with suspicious bruises. Another said he was forced to resign after reporting that a coach was having inappropriate contact with students. I connected each of them with resources like my union rep and ALEC. I shared what had worked for me in terms of documenting everything and getting legal advice early. My experience had turned me into an informal advocate for teachers who were trying to put children first, but getting punished for it. It felt good to help other people navigate the same kind of situation I'd survived. Cadence's mother and I started meeting for coffee every couple weeks. What began as a teacher and parent relationship had grown into real friendship after everything we'd been through together. One Saturday morning in April, she told me she'd been thinking about going to law school. She said watching how the legal system both failed and eventually protected Cadence had inspired her to want to work on child protection cases. She wanted to help other families who were dealing with abuse and custody situations. I told her she'd be amazing at that work because she understood what families go through from the inside. She applied to 3 law schools that spring and got accepted to her first choice program starting that fall. Knowing she was turning her trauma into purpose made me respect her even more. The interim principal who'd taken over when the former principal got placed on leave did such a good job that the district offered her the permanent position in May. Before accepting, she asked the staff to vote on whether we wanted her to stay. The vote was almost unanimous in support of her appointment. She'd spent the past several months creating a culture where teachers felt heard and valued. When we raised concerns about students or safety issues, she actually listened and took action instead of getting defensive or trying to cover things up. Student safety had become the top priority in every decision she made. Having a principal who supported us instead of fighting us made coming to work feel completely different. Renata called me into her office in late May and offered me a position at the district office working full-time on the safety initiatives we'd been developing. The job would involve training administrators, reviewing safety protocols at all the schools, and being a resource for teachers who needed support. The salary was better, and I wouldn't have the daily stress of classroom management. I thought about it for a few days, but ultimately told her I wanted to stay in my classroom. Being in the district office would let me influence policy and help a lot of people. But being in the classroom meant I could make a direct impact on kids' lives every single day. My experience with Cadence had taught me that frontline educators are the most important defenders of student safety, because we're the ones who see the kids every day and notice when something's wrong. I wanted to stay where I could keep watching out for students who needed someone to protect them. A few months later, a reporter from Education Weekly contacted me about writing an article on mandatory reporting and how teachers can protect students even when administrators push back. I agreed to the interview and spent an hour on the phone describing everything that happened with Cadence and how the system almost failed her. The article came out 3 weeks after that, and within days, my inbox filled up with messages from teachers across the country. A woman in Ohio told me her principal threatened to fire her for calling CPS on a student's parents. A man in Texas said his superintendent tried to make him retract a report because the family was prominent in the community. A teacher in Florida wrote that she got transferred to a different school as punishment for protecting a kindergartner from an abusive uncle. Reading these emails made me realize how many educators face retaliation for doing what the law requires us to do. I started responding to every message, sharing what worked for me, and connecting teachers with resources like union support and legal aid. Some of them told me later that my advice helped them fight back and keep their jobs while protecting their students. The school year ended in June, and Cadence moved up to 3rd grade with a new teacher. I worried she might struggle with the transition after everything she'd been through, but her mother kept me updated throughout the summer. Cadence was doing great in therapy and making friends at a day camp. When school started again in August, she stopped by my classroom during recess one afternoon. She showed me a drawing of her and 3 other girls playing soccer, all of them smiling with the sun shining above them. I asked her about her new friends, and she talked excitedly about their games and jokes. Seeing her happy and confident reminded me exactly why I fought so hard that day in the lobby. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was actually thriving. Before she left, she hugged me tight and whispered that she felt safe now. That moment made every difficult part of the past year worth it. Graham called me in September with news about a district initiative. The school board had approved funding for a new position called Student Safety Ombudsman. This person would report directly to Renata and handle any concerns about safety protocols or complaints about retaliation against teachers who made reports. Graham explained that my case exposed how badly the district needed someone in this role, someone who could intervene when administrators put reputation over child protection. The ombudsman would have authority to investigate complaints, recommend policy changes, and ensure teachers felt supported instead of threatened when they protected students. He thanked me for speaking up at the board meeting because without my testimony, this position probably wouldn't exist. I felt proud knowing that Cadence's story led to real systemic change that would help other kids and teachers. In October, I got an invitation to speak at the state education conference in the capital. The conference organizers wanted me to present a session about my experience protecting Cadence and navigating the retaliation that followed. I was nervous about speaking to a room full of educators, but I knew sharing my story could help others facing similar situations. The conference happened in early November, and about 60 teachers showed up for my session. I walked them through everything from noticing the warning signs in Cadence's drawings, to standing up to the principal in the lobby, to fighting back against the attempts to blame me. After my presentation, the question period ran over by 20 minutes because so many teachers wanted to share their own stories. A middle school counselor told everyone about getting written up for reporting suspected abuse by a coach. An elementary principal described being pressured by central office to ignore red flags with a wealthy family. A high school teacher explained how she lost her department chair position after calling CPS on a student's parents who were school board members. Every story showed me that the problem was way bigger than I'd realized. These weren't isolated incidents. This was a pattern happening in schools everywhere. I exchanged contact information with dozens of teachers that day and promised to stay connected as we all worked to change these broken systems. A week after the conference, the director of a local child advocacy organization reached out to me. She'd heard about my case and my conference presentation, and she wanted to know if I'd consider joining their board of directors. The organization worked on policy reform, supported families dealing with abuse, and trained professionals on recognizing and responding to child maltreatment. I met with her and 2 other board members over coffee, and they explained that having a teacher's perspective on the board would strengthen their work. Teachers see kids every day and notice things that others miss, but we often don't have enough support or protection when we try to help. I accepted the position because it gave me a platform to push for better policies and advocate for both children and the adults who protect them. The board met monthly, and I contributed to discussions about mandatory reporting laws, school safety protocols, and ways to prevent retaliation against educators. Being part of this organization connected me with lawyers, social workers, child psychologists, and other advocates who all shared the same goal of keeping kids safe. One Saturday morning in April, Cadence's mother and I met for our regular coffee. She looked tired but excited as she told me about her first year of law school. She was taking family law and child protection courses, and she'd decided to specialize in representing families dealing with abuse and custody battles. She said watching how the legal system both failed and eventually protected Cadence had inspired her to help other families navigate these complicated situations. Turning her trauma into purpose was healing for both her and Cadence. She showed me her grades from the fall semester, all high marks, and talked about applying for a summer internship with a family law firm. I told her how proud I was of her for taking something horrible and using it to create positive change. She smiled and said she learned that from watching me refuse to back down when the principal tried to silence me. 2 years passed since that day Joe showed up at the school. The new safety protocols we'd fought for had become standard practice across the entire district. Every school now had updated visitor management systems, clear procedures for verifying adults picking up students, and mandatory training on recognizing abuse and supporting mandatory reporters. In those 2 years, teachers at 3 different schools stopped unauthorized adults from taking students. In each case, the adult claimed to be family, but wasn't on the authorized pickup list. The teachers asked questions, verified with parents, and kept the children safe. All 3 situations could have ended badly if those teachers hadn't felt confident that their principals would support them instead of punishing them. The district's new culture made it clear that protecting children were always the right choice, and teachers who acted on concerns would be backed up, not blamed. Those 3 children stayed safe because the system finally worked the way it should have worked for Cadence from the beginning. I continued teaching 2nd grade, watching my students closely for any signs that something might be wrong at home. I knew the warning signs now, not just from training, but from lived experience. I understood how a child's drawings could reveal secrets they were too scared to speak out loud. I recognized the fear in a student's eyes when they saw someone who hurt them, and I knew that being brave enough to act on those observations could save a life. Cadence was in 4th grade now, thriving academically and socially. Sometimes I saw her on the playground during recess, laughing with her friends or playing kickball. Every time I spotted her happy and carefree, I remembered that awful moment in the lobby when I had to physically hold her back from Joe. I remembered the principal trying to force me to let her go. I remembered Cadence's mother bursting through those doors just in time. And I remembered deciding that protecting that little girl mattered more than my job, or my reputation, or anything else. Doing the right thing had cost me months of stress, conflict with administrators, and uncertainty about my career. But watching Cadence play with her friends made every bit of that struggle worth it. She was safe, she was healing, she was thriving. And I'd do it all over again without hesitation because some things matter more than staying comfortable or avoiding conflict. Protecting children is always worth the cost. That's it for today's story. Thank you for spending a little time here. It really means a lot. I hope this one left you smiling.